Well, welcome to the Holistic Health Lecture Series on Fridays, Optimizing Health and Well-Being. I'm your host, Eric Pepper. I'm a faculty member at the Institute for Holistic Health Studies, which is part of the Department of Recreation, Parks, and Tourism at San Francisco State. And as many of you know, our courses fulfill the upper division GE, and we also offer a minor and certificate in holistic health. As many of you know, the speaker series is offered the first and third Friday of the month with new and different presenters. Today, I'm so honored and so happy to introduce our speaker, Marisa Soski, who's now a naturopath. She was in our program about 8 years ago, and where she also took the holistic health minor and certificate and then went on her own way to become a naturopath. And at present, she's a doctor of naturopathic medicine at Stage Cancer Care in Oregon and at Valley Natural Medicine in California. And I feel so lucky as a faculty member to have a student who then grows on and learns and becomes even better than we are. And I can now learn from her and from our students and become essentially great colleagues. So I'm just truly honored. So with much pleasure, I introduce Marisa Soski, and who will present today on nutrition to support the stress response. Marisa.
Thank you so much. It is truly an honor to be here. It feels very full circle to now be presenting to all of you. So thank you for having me. I will just let people know that I am in the mountains in Colorado. So the internet is usually pretty good, but sometimes there's little glitches. So please be patient with me if that happens, and feel free to ask to repeat anything if necessary. Oh, okay. It just took a second to load.
Okay.
So my name is Dr. Marisa Soski. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I also have a master's in nutrition, which is why I love talking about food. It's one of my favorite things. I did graduate from SF State, so it's awesome to be talking to y'all. I use she, her pronouns, and we'll get started. Yeah, and as Dr. Pepper said, I have 2 different practices, one in Oregon and one in California. So what I came to talk to you all today is about the role of nutrition in the stress response. So I'm going to go through a number of things. I'm just going to put this up for reference. I'm not going to read through that. We'll get there. This quote to me was like perfectly captured what I wanted to talk about today, which was, in today's stressful climate, everyone needs to reduce stress in the areas that they can control. The place to start is at the dinner table. This is from Charles Moss, who wrote The Adaptation Diet. So food, again, especially in pandemic times when so much feels out of our control, taking control of the small things that we can, which food is actually not small, it's huge and has a huge impact on our health, is a great place to start. So I promise this is the only slide that I'm going to actually read. What we eat and the way our body manages stress are intimately related. What we eat can affect our stress response, and our reaction to stress can affect the way that we digest food. Since both of these things we can control, we can utilize both nutrition to reduce stress and reduction in stress to make the most of our nutritional intake. So I'll go through all that today. But first, let's do a little bit of a physiology lesson, just in case I don't know where everyone is coming from. So forgive me if it's redundant information, but for those of you who don't have this foundation, I think it's important. So the first thing is to talk about our nervous system. So PNS stands for peripheral nervous system. You have a peripheral nervous system and a central nervous system. We're going to focus on this today because what we're going to talk about is the autonomic nervous system. That's divided into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So your sympathetic is what they call flight or flight or freeze. So you react to a stressor and you usually do one of those 3 things. Your parasympathetic is your rest and digest. And that's really what gets you into the calming part of your nervous system. And then you also have this enteric division, which is your whole digestive system. And what's awesome about your digestive system is there's actually more neural connections than in your brain. And when we were early humans, we actually thought more with our gut because of food scarcity, and this is what dictated our decision making. And once we reached food security, then our higher brain started to develop more neural connections once we didn't have to worry about where and what we were going to eat. But our gut is really a second brain And if you ever, a gut feeling is spot on, like you feel with your gut. So much of our culture, we ignore that, or we're not taught to listen to that. And so we're taught to only think with our minds versus our bodies. But a lot of intuition even comes from that gut neural connections, and you can learn a lot from that. Now, your enteric nervous system plays a lot into your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and vice versa. So there's always communication going back and forth. It's not unidirectional. So this is what your stress response is. And this is important to understand as we talk about all of these things and why stress is important, or why dealing with your stress is important. So you get a stressor that your brain thinks is a stressful event. And I know from Dr. Pepper's class, there's a book, why zebras don't get ulcers. And humans have this amazing ability to react to stressors that they make up in their mind. Not even that are happening in real life, versus animals usually just happen to things that are happening in the moment. Now with this pandemic and everything, there's constantly stressors going on. Even if we're at home with no real stress, we hear about it in the news, it's constantly on our minds. And so this stress response is constantly being activated, even more so. I mean, in different populations, it happens even more, especially with what's going on with people of color in this country right now in various facets, constant stress response. So what that happens is your brain gets a stress response. It releases something called ACTH, which triggers your adrenal glands to release adrenaline and cortisol. People are very familiar with adrenaline. That's your norepinephrine and epinephrine, but more people are less familiar with cortisol. But both of these are involved in your stress response. And what it does is it helps you run from a bear, essentially. It activates all the things that would do that. So you're going to increase your breathing so you can get more oxygen to your muscles. You're going to mobilize glucose so your muscles can burn glucose. You're going to increase blood pressure so you get all that blood flowing. Tunnel vision, you don't need to pay attention to your peripheral vision when you're running from a bear. You just need to go. Accelerating your heart rate, slowing down your digestion. So you don't need to be digesting food if you're running from a bear and sweating. Now, this digestion piece is what we're focused on right now, and why it's so important to go back and forth between your digestion system and your stress response, because when you're stressed out, your digestion shuts down. You're not digesting your food. You're not absorbing it. It's not being utilized in your body, and that can lead to a whole slew of issues. But the foods you eat are also can also be stressors. So that's what we're going to talk about. So it's like I've been alluding to, it's this dynamic relationship. It goes back and forth. So it's not just that the brain affects digestion, your digestion also affects your brain. About 90% of your serotonin, which is your happy neurotransmitter, gets produced in your gut from your microbiota, as well as dopamine and a lot of other neurotransmitters. So when you have an unhealthy gut, you're not making a lot of those neurotransmitters that make you healthy. So a lot of times with a lot of my patients, when they come to me with mental health issues, so depression, anxiety, a whole slew of other things, what we're going to first address is the gut and gut inflammation, because that itself has a huge impact. It's not the only thing that I focus on, but it is a big piece. So there's a vicious cycle when we talk about foods that we eat that trigger a stress response in our body. It's different for different people, and we'll talk about that coming up. But this is just one image that I found that was talking about stimulants and sugar. So what happens is when we have a food that we eat that stimulates our stress response, it triggers our adrenal glands, what we talked about, to make cortisol. And then we go into that fight or flight mode. And we release a bunch of blood sugar into our body, because if we need to run from a bear, our muscles need glucose to go, which leads to excess blood sugar, which leads to insulin issues, insulin resistance over time. And then also too, we get this huge buildup of sugar, insulin gets released, then we get a big blood sugar crash, and then we crave sugar again. So this is kind of the vicious cycle of sugar, but it's not just sugar that can trigger this, it's other foods as well. So this is really important to keep in mind when we're also talking about the effect of foods on chronic disease and how this could lead to chronic disease, because obviously diabetes is insulin resistance, chronic insulin resistance. So that can happen as well as creating a bunch of inflammation, which leads to a number of disease. All of this I could go on for ages about, so I'm trying to keep it as concise as possible. Another big influence on this is our microbiome. So like I said before, our microbiome is intimately involved in creating neurotransmitters, and especially our happy neurotransmitters. And stress itself impacts our microbiome, and especially foods we eat. So this is comparing kind of a non-Western, which is a mostly I would say a Mediterranean style diet versus a Western diet. What happens is when we eat a Western diet, we get a decrease in beneficial bacteria in our gut and an increase in bacteria that have kind of an inflammatory response, and vice versa with a non-Western diet. So what happens is with a Western diet, because of the foods we eat, we lead to increased anxiety and depression, versus a Mediterranean diet, we're increasing these beneficial bacteria. And also these are foods that our gut lining feeds on, which is very important. So we have a healthy gut lining and an improvement in mood disorder. Also, when you eat foods that you're intolerant of, or that cause this inflammatory picture, you get what's called leaky gut. And what happens with leaky gut is that the tight junctions in your digestive tract that keep bigger molecules of food from getting into your bloodstream, those junctions widen. And so you're allowing bigger particles of food, possibly other yeast, bacteria, and parasites that aren't supposed to be in your blood. And once they get in your blood's not digesting anything. So if you get bigger molecules of food in your blood, your body doesn't know what to do with them because they're not broken down into the building blocks that your blood's used to processing. So that leads to inflammation. So you see, inflammation is really, really the key of this. And in eating foods that you're intolerant and sensitive to or have an allergy to will cause this situation as well. Stress also does this, so it's kind of both. But when you have this inflammation, your immune system releases a bunch of things called cytokines. And cytokines can affect your mood as well. Can lead to, it's kind of like when you're sick and you feel crappy. A lot of that is because the cytokines that get released from your immune system, cytokines are just immune signal or molecule signals to the rest of your body. So we want to keep inflammation down. So I liken the role of all of this, but especially food intolerances, to a bucket. A bucket is our bucket is our capacity to manage stress. It's different for everybody. It's a different size and different things fill it up. And so I get a lot of people going, well, I was feeling totally great up until this moment, and then everything changed. Well, it was likely that things were slowly filling their bucket and they just didn't even know about it. They didn't notice it. And then in the moment it overflows, all of a sudden we have disease manifest. So various things fill up this bucket. So psychological stress, toxins in our environment, and especially food intolerances are huge, and they greatly fill up this bucket. And it's one of the things that we have the biggest control over. Again, like if you live in a city, you can do some things to mitigate the toxins in your environment, but to some extent, that's a set thing. You can manage your stress, but again, we're talking about food today. So food intolerances are a big thing you can do to stop overflowing your bucket. Here are the most common food sensitivities. So dairy is huge, gluten and grains, nuts and seeds, yeast, soy, caffeine, sugar. Sugar is huge. Sugar is very anti-inflammatory. I will say for my own stress, this is anecdotal from my own stress and mental health situation. I cut out cane sugar about a year ago, and my anxiety, depression swings went from crazy swings to very, very moderate. I still experience it, but it has a huge impact. I found a huge impact on my mental health. And I know now when I eat sugar, the next day or 2 days later, I'm going to be a lot more emotional or irritable and have a lot more issues. So sugar is huge. It's different for everybody, but that's just, most people have issues with sugar. Citrus fruits, but also fruit in general. Some people don't tolerate fruit in general. Eggs, nightshades, processed food. The thing with processed food is there's so many food derivatives that even in vegan products, there might be a dairy-derived product in a vegan product. According to a food chemist, it's no longer dairy because they've extracted it, but it is still comes from dairy, so it's still dairy. And it's hard with processed food to really eliminate all of that. Some things that are less known common intolerances are potato. So a lot of people are intolerant of potato and don't know it. Honey's pretty rare, but still exists. Some people just don't tolerate meat, and then also fish. So these are less talked about. Now, discovering your food sensitivity or intolerance, I'm not really talking much about that today. If I have time at the end, I would love to circle back to that because it's super important. I'd say if you do anything, find out which foods are triggering you and eliminate those. And that alone will have huge impacts on your stress. Like I said, just taking those out reduces the inflammation in your gut. You're able to produce healthy neurotransmitters, and your mood and your mental health will improve. So again, I'll talk about different methods of testing that later. Or if you're interested, you can also message me. My contact information is at the end, and this is what I do with a lot of my patients. All right, so general recommendations and some food hygiene. So general recommendations is eat the rainbow. Eat lots of fruits and veggies. Fruits and veggies are rich in fiber, which is great for building your microbiome. Fruits and veggies are also rich in vitamins and minerals that we'll talk about in a second. Omega-3 fatty acids are very inflammatory modulators. So that's really huge. And then calming herbs, which we'll talk about very briefly. That could be a whole class on itself, but we're talking about food today. And then foods to decrease. So like I said, sugar and refined carbohydrates, they cause that blood glucose spike, which is a stressor that causes a release of cortisol and insulin, and over time leads to insulin resistance and chronic disease. Wheat and dairy, just because these are some of the biggest inflammatory foods. Trans fats and saturated fats are inflammatory. And then again, food allergies and intolerances. I cannot stress enough. All right, so some food and eating hygiene. This is more of a mindful eating. So I'm not talking about how we're preparing our food or making sure we wash our hands. Like that's important, but that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about here is getting yourself into a parasympathetic situation and state so that you can actually digest your food. So we get into that rest and digest when we're eating. So often in our culture, now a little bit less with the pandemic, do we eat in our cars, but we're rushing from one place to another. But I bet now more than ever, we're eating in front of our computers. I know I am definitely guilty of this. I definitely ate a meal while putting together this presentation. So I'm working on it too, but this is something to strive for. So the biggest thing is to slow down when you eat. So often we're eating our food so fast, we're not focusing on what we're doing. And where that really leads to overeating because we don't allow our satiation signals, we're getting full signals to catch up with the rate that we're eating. So we end up overeating and then all of a sudden later feeling, oh, I'm so full. So slowing down. And that also allows all of the digestive juices in your mouth and your digestive tract to really mix with your food. So you're not pushing food through so quickly and not allowing your body to actually digest it while it's going through. The next is being gracious. In some cultures, they say grace. I like to just take a moment and pause and close my eyes before I eat. My partner and I sometimes will just hold hands and, have a moment of gratitude for each other and for the food that we're eating. That just gives yourself a moment to be present with the food before you eat it. Also, taking a couple of deep breaths before you eat gets you in that parasympathetic response. When you take belly breaths, you stimulate the vagus nerve, which is your main parasympathetic nerve. So taking a couple deep breaths gets you in that state. And then smell and visually enjoy your food before consuming it. That really allows it triggers your brain to say, oh, food's coming. I'm going to release all those enzymes to break down my food. I'm going to get all my digestive juices flowing so that your body's ready for the food before you eat it. Next is chew thoroughly. I listened to a lecture from another nutritionist who said, if you take one thing away from this lecture, it's just chew your food. What that does is you have a lot of digestive juices in your mouth. And so really allowing that food to break down in your mouth. It also, again, gives you time, breaks it down into smaller pieces so that it's easier to process throughout the rest of your digestive tract. Put your utensils down between bites. That goes back into all of it. So slowing down and really chewing your food. focus on enjoying each bite, taste the food, see what it feels like in your mouth, what the different textures and flavors, and how does that change over time. There's mindful eating exercises where you just put a raisin in your mouth and you leave it there for minutes, just appreciating what the raisin tastes like and feels like and how that changes. And the irony is I hate raisins, and they always do it with raisins, but it's given me an opportunity to be more mindful. And then a big one is avoid distractions while eating. So what screens do and what white light does and all this, especially watching TV, is it really gets our sympathetic nervous system going, especially if you're listening to the news or watching a stressful event. So that's really taking us out of that parasympathetic mode. So you really want to avoid distractions, especially electronics, even reading, anything that's stimulatory to your brain, because you want all of your energy be going into your gut. Next is, I know this is a little hard now with pandemic, but it's changing a little bit, is to share food with others. So sharing food with others isn't a distraction. So that's a little bit separate than doing something else. So sharing food with others, I would say I would be lenient with everyone on this pandemic time that if you want to set up your computer and have a Zoom dinner with somebody, that's kind of a compromise on this. So you can enjoy food with others, but you're not actively engaging on the computer. And then a big piece is stop when full. So all of this will really help you achieve this, because so often in our culture we overeat because we're not paying attention to how we feel. We're eating too quickly before our signals that we're full reaches our brain. And then that leads to a whole slew of other issues. So these are all my mindful eating tips. This is just brief support. So there's a lot of botanicals that can support nutrition. And some of these are food. You can use as food. So like dandelion greens you can use. Burdock is really great in food. Licorice, holy basil. So these are all kind of different groups. So adaptogens help you adapt to stress. And so these are really awesome to help support your stress response. Nervines help calm your nervous system. And so these are really great herbs to help kind of create a sense of calm. And then bitters help stimulate your digestive juices. So these are really great to take before a meal to kind of get your digestive flow going, and then eat so that your body's really ready to process and digest your food. All right. So important nutrients in stress response, but maybe this is before I jump into this, a good time to get up and move our bodies a little bit. So I'm going to set you down. You get to see me move my body a little bit, and I encourage you to move your body too. All right, I'm just going to take a sip of water real quick before diving back in. All right. So there are a number of nutrients that you can get from your food that help support a healthy stress response. So first, I'm going to talk about some vitamins. So B vitamins are some of the most. It was hard actually. I'm going to say all of these are some of the most important. So maybe all of them are very important. And I also C and E got left down here, but they're super important too. It was hard to decide which vitamins were most important. So they're all important. B vitamins are intimately involved in the way that we create energy in our cells. And at every step, if anyone has ever studied biochemistry, B vitamins are involved in almost every step of our biochemical processes. So getting a nice wide range of B vitamins is really important. They're also found that people who have a higher intake of B vitamins have a lower stress level. So it's really important. So these are some of the foods that B vitamins come from. And what you'll notice is there's a lot of overlap between these. So I would say if you take anything away, eat a balanced diet. Eat lots of fruits and veggies. Eat lean proteins, even plant-based proteins, you can get almost all your nutrients from. But eat the rainbow and eat a variety of foods. So you'll see, and there's a lot of overlap. So seeds and nuts, soy, beans and legumes, whole grains, cashews, brassica family, which will come up a lot, and that's your broccoli, cauliflower, kale, mustard greens, Brussels sprouts, all of those family of vegetables are your brassica family. B12 and folate is really important. So that's and that is from your egg, meat, liver, fish. So B12 is only found in animal protein. So if you are following a vegan diet, that is something to supplement. It is important because you do need B12. You'll get very fatigued, have a lot of mood issues if you don't have adequate B12. It's totally possible with a vegan diet. You just do need to be aware of it. So fish. Folate can be found more in vegetables than and B12 is not found in vegetables, but beans, legumes, brassica. Brassicas again in whole grains. Vitamin D is super important. Again, this is one that's really hard to get from plant-based sources. Mushrooms do have some, but you do have to eat a lot of mushrooms. But it's found in most animal proteins, so fish, liver, and eggs are the highest. I call vitamin D. I have a liquid supplement instead of a capsule, and I call it my liquid sunshine. So especially now, pandemic times, I mean, even before, as students, you're in the classroom a lot, you're at home doing work a lot, you're not getting out into the sun. It's also the Bay Area, which at least if you're in San Francisco proper, you're probably not getting as much sun. I was in the Pacific Northwest, definitely not getting a lot of sun. So supplementing vitamin D or making sure you get it from your food is super important. I've had just fixing vitamin D levels for folks or improving their vitamin D levels, and that handles their mood, their mood situation. Depression being the biggest thing with this. So vitamin D cannot understate. Now, vitamin A, also great for the immune system, managing stress. I like to think of vitamin A is your yellows and oranges and your greens. So carrots, sweet potato, apricots, all your yellows and oranges. And then also dark leafy greens, kale, spinach, broccoli, brassicas as well. Now, again, I said it was hard. Vitamin C is super important. And vitamin E, these are both antioxidants. So what happens when we have stress is we have oxidative stress on our cellular level as well. And so antioxidants are really important in mitigating the oxidative stress that our cells feel. I would say one plug for vitamin C is that one of the best sources is actually bell peppers, red bell peppers. Everyone thinks of oranges, which is great. Oranges are good too, but they have a lot of sugar as well. So I really prefer to recommend red bell peppers as vitamin C. Also, all your dark leafy greens are going to have a lot of vitamin C as well. Now, there's some important minerals involved in your stress response. I would say one of the most important ones is magnesium. We are so mineral depleted in our culture right now with the lack of intake of vegetables, but also if you look at the soil health of our vegetables compared to 50 years ago, there's less minerals in our soil, therefore less minerals are getting up into our food. And so really focusing on making sure we're getting enough minerals either through supplementation or through food is really important. And magnesium is one of our biggest stress relievers. It's like a natural muscle relaxant. It also really gets depleted when we have an acute stress response, so replenishing it is really important. And kelp is actually the highest by far food source. So what I recommend to folks is getting some kelp powder and just start sprinkling it on your food. You can sprinkle it on salads, you can sprinkle it on veggies, you can sprinkle it on just about anything. So that's great. Nuts and whole grains also great, and avocados and soy as well. Zinc is really great for our immune system and keeping our inflammatory system under, healthy. Oysters are one of the best sources for any oyster lovers out there. Great excuse to go hit up $1 oyster bar. Pumpkin seeds are also a great source. Ginger, nuts, and whole grains. Selenium is a really powerful antioxidant. So as I was talking, stress creates oxidative free radicals in the body, and so you want to help reduce that. And so selenium is great. Brazil nuts are one of the best sources. Even just 1 or 2 Brazil nuts a day gives you your plenty of selenium, your daily value, but also whole wheat, Swiss chard, and whole grains as well. Potassium is another huge one. So we are a very potassium depleted culture. We have a lot of sodium in our diet, but not a lot of potassium. And potassium is involved in calming our nervous system, calming our heart, calming out our system. And if you notice, bananas are not even on this list. All of these foods have more potassium than bananas. Somehow the banana lobbying conglomerate got together and said, same with the oranges and vitamin C, but bananas are like, we're the best source of potassium, but actually you're not, and all of these things are better. So avocado, apricots, lentils, prunes, acorn squash, raisins, and sweet potatoes. And what's great, especially about avocado, is it's less sugar. So bananas have a ton of sugar, which can cause a whole number of issues. I'm not anti-banana, so please don't take it that way. Bananas are great. Just in terms of potassium, they get a little bit more credit than where credit is due. So some other nutrients. So antioxidants I've been talking about this whole time. So these are some of the highest plant-based sources of antioxidants. So berries, asparagus, artichoke, cacao, for all you dark chocolate lovers. I would just say, watch how much sugar is in it. Dark leafy greens, and the brassica family again. Omega-3 fatty acids, anti-inflammatory, great inflammatory modulars. So those come from your seeds and nuts, hemp seeds, chia seeds, flaxseed, all of those are awesome. Nuts, walnuts are really awesome, almonds, even cashews, although they're higher. Cashews, yeah. Olive oil, avocado again, and then fatty fish. So your tuna, sardines are really great. Tuna as well, some fatty tuna. So your fatty fish. Next group is our amino acids. So the amino acids are really important for creating something called GABA. Now, GABA isn't what's called an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So that calms your brain. So glycine is one of the backbones. So GABA is made up of a few amino acids, and glycine is one of the most important. So there's, for a lot of my patients, what I'll recommend is there's a supplement that's magnesium and glycine together. It's called magnesium glycinate. I love that because it's magnesium, gives them a high dose. It's also not a magnesium form that causes diarrhea, which magnesium citrate. So if anyone has taken like Naturopathic powder and gotten diarrhea from that, that's because it is an osmotic laxative. So the magnesium glycinate doesn't do that. So it can give higher doses of magnesium, and it has the glycinate, which helps promote GABA. I have the foods, there's food sources of these. So like poultry, fish are all, I have it in my notes, but I can't see them right now. So I don't remember off the top of my head what the food sources of all these are. But L-theanine also helps promote GABA. L-theanine mostly is found in green and black tea, higher in green tea. So that's why when you have green tea, there is caffeine, but you also kind of get that sense of inner calm as well when you drink it. That's the L-theanine. So I think L-theanine is awesome. It's one of my go-to sleep aids. L-tryptophan, I guess the classic is, you eat a lot of turkey at Thanksgiving and you get really tired, and everyone blames that on L-tryptophan. It's also probably because you ate a lot of food that's making you tired, but turkey does have some, as well as other poultry and fish. And then taurine as well contributes to this inhibitory kind of calming state. And then lastly, there's a million other things, but lastly, what I'm talking about today in terms of nutrients is melatonin. So melatonin is naturally produced when you sleep, which is why a healthy sleep cycle is really important. But when you're really stressed out, it is hard to get sleep. For anyone who's experienced that, you usually have crazy dreams, or it's hard to fall asleep, hard to stay asleep. So there are foods that can help promote melatonin production as well. So tart cherries, goji berries, eggs, milk, fish, and nuts. And it's also a very common supplement. Melatonin is super important for your stress response, and also very, very important for your immune system. They found that if someone is melatonin depleted and it really impacts their immune system, and they have immune inhibition. And when they replete them with melatonin, their immune system turns back on. So really awesome, which is why sleep is so important. All right, and now the role of comfort foods. So how do we find balance between eating healthy and enjoying life and eating foods that we love? I don't eat meat anymore, but when I did, people used to say, well, Marisa, you eat so healthy, but why do you eat bacon? And my response was, well, you have to feed your soul. So I would say the same thing about other foods, which is you have to find balance. So with a lot of people, what I recommend is the 80-20 rule. 80% of the time, eat super healthy, follow the guidelines, eat whole foods, all that. But 20% of the time, make space for the foods that you love. So I work a lot with cancer patients, and they say, does this mean I can never have sugar again? And I say, no. If it's your birthday and all you want is birthday cake, and you follow, a very low sugar, lots of fruits and vegetables, Mediterranean style diet, the rest of the year, and you want a piece of cake on your birthday, eat that piece of cake and make sure you don't have any guilt about it. I think the guilt that we have around food creates more stress in our body than even just eating the food. So I'm not saying you shouldn't feel, that you should just go out and say, well, I'm not going to feel guilty about eating anything. I think there's a balance in all of this, but really allowing space for it. But then really focusing on that 80% of the time, eating healthy, because it's really going to set your body up for success. And with that, when you do eat these foods, eat very mindfully. Notice how they're making you feel. Is it worth it? And again, I'm not trying to guilt people into one way or another. That's really not what I'm about. I think that food is a very individual choice. I know that for example, I don't tolerate sugar very well, so I don't eat it all the time, but there's sugar in sushi rice. And every so often going out for sushi is totally worth it because sushi is delicious. So, but I do it mindfully, knowing hey, I'm going to be eating this. I'm going to enjoy it. And again, not having that guilt associated with it. But then also on the flip side is paying more attention to what you're eating and saying, hey, how is this making me feel? What can be really helpful is keeping a food journal. And this isn't for judgment. It isn't for you to say, oh, well, I only eat vegetables, excellent, or I ate so much of this. It's not judgment. It's so for you to notice, oh, I ate this thing this day. And then 2 days later, I just had the craziest dreams, or all of a sudden my mood was off, or I ate this and the next day my joint pain was so much worse. So keeping a food journal can help you be a little bit more mindful about how the food you're eating is affecting you. And then most importantly, be kind to yourself. Making food changes is really hard. We have a lot of emotion tied up in something called a food story. I've done a lot of training into food relationship coaching and food story coaching. So I explore with people, why do you have that attachment to that food? Or why do you have the attachment to that idea about something? Is it serving you? Is it not serving you? But it's hard because a lot of these are deep-rooted beliefs that we have from culture, from the way that we grew up, from external influences, from internal influences, the way our parents talk to us about food, all these kinds of things. So when you make food choices, you'll notice a lot of emotions come up, and it's important to acknowledge that and take that into account when you're doing this, and to be kind to yourself through the process. You have enough stress right now going on in life to not beat yourself up a little bit, on another thing. So I could talk for hours about being kind to yourself because this is really important, but I will leave it with that. And I don't have a clock, so I don't know what time it is, but hopefully we have some time for questions. And this is also my contact information, so you're welcome to reach out to me if you have any further questions or want to get in touch.
Well, Marisa, you may have to turn. Marisa, I truly want to thank you for this holistic perspective of diet. It's not just a simple way to say, eat this food to get better, or only eat bananas, or whatever it is, but really in context that we are really a holistic system. And also not only just the foods we eat, how we digest it, etc. And your really generosity, as well as the sense of being kind to yourself. And so with that note, I want to just for a moment give an applause. I'll put my thumbs up for you and for this great presentation. I want to remind everybody that this fall semester, Marisa will be teaching for the Institute for Holistic Health Studies within the Department of Recreation, Parks and Tourism. Will teach a course on this topic for the whole semester. And now I'd like to throw it out throw it open for questions. So please, anyone who has questions, either yell out, scream out, or whatever, or if you do not want to do that, put it into the text box and I'll read it back to her.
Can you guys hear me? I really just want to say how much I appreciate and I thank you all. I learned so much today. And I was wondering the name of the class that will be taught, Dr.
Rick, do you know by chance offhand?
Yes, HH 560. It's Naturopathic Medicine, Holistic Health 560. Also note that we're trying to have a lab one weekend, probably an early weekend in October, a full day of activity, but that's not yet firm. We don't know exactly what day or whether we can offer a Saturday only class, but we're working on it. So Holistic Health 560.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so there were some questions that came up in the chat, so maybe I'll post those. So someone asked, will we have access to these slides? I'm happy to share them with everybody. I don't know if there's an easy way to get them out. Otherwise, you can email me, and I'll put my information in the chat as well. You can email me and I will send them to you. So then great question, which is, what are your thoughts on pop culture diets such as keto, keto fasting, cheat days, etc.? So there's always somebody out there who tries one diet and says, oh my gosh, this worked amazing for me. Everybody should do it. And I didn't talk about this, so I really appreciate you asking this question. So I believe very deeply in biochemical individuality, which means that all of us are different. A different diet's going to work great for different people. So there's certain people that do keto and feel amazing. You know, it's like they wake up every morning with energy that they never had and whatnot. I have some patients who do keto, and I work with cancer patients, so keto comes up a lot, who try it and feel absolutely horrible. And so I really think it's about finding what works for you. And I recommend trying a number of different things. I've done this for myself because I never recommend something, or very rarely recommend something I haven't tried myself. So I went through a whole period of trying keto for a month, and then trying vegan for a month, and trying this for a month, and trying this for a month. And over time, I figured out what works for my body. And so I recommend doing that, is trying a bunch of different things and seeing how you feel, because that's really the biggest indicator. And then also working with someone to, again, I'm going to plug the food intolerances again, find out what your intolerances are, and then build that into any other thing that you're doing. So if it's keto and you can't do dairy, then that's just something, you're intolerant of dairy. Like, that's something to just be aware of as you're doing keto. There's ways to do it without dairy, but you just be aware of that. So, but in general, like, the fasting is like a whole nother topic that I love talking about. I do a lot of fasting with myself and with my patients. So maybe another day, if you're interested in that, you can message me. Are there any opinions on the Whole30 food plan? Yes, I think Whole30 is a really great way to introduce people into the idea of eating whole foods only. As you notice, one of the intolerances was processed foods. And the reason being, when you have a processed food, one, you've removed yourself so far from the whole foods that it becomes a little bit harder for your body to break down. But two, you get also this whole slew of different things that, even organic processed foods, you get, for example, like my primary intolerance is potato. I don't do well with sugar, but I can also do potato. Now, they've taken potato and there's so many food additives that are derived from potato that has made it difficult for me to eat things that are processed without, I got really great at label reading. But eating processed foods is just hard because there's so many different things in it that your body may or may not tolerate. So I think Whole30 in general is really great. Again, see how you feel on it. Maybe you try it, and maybe there's certain foods that work and certain foods that don't, but a whole foods diet in general is money. So, next question is, does arugula have the same benefits as other greens? Same and different. Every green is going to have a slightly different profile as other greens, but greens in general are awesome. So if you love arugula, throw it on everything. I think arugula is great. It's also, arugula can be really bitter, which is something that we don't get a lot in our Western diet. We very much go towards the rich and fatty and the sweet. and salty. So bitter is not a taste that gets incorporated into our diets very often. So I think by including bitter greens that are bitter is super beneficial. And again, when I was talking about bitter herbs, it's same with bitter foods. Anything that's bitter is getting your digestive juices going. So it's really great, especially when you're eating a high fat diet or a high fat meal. To really get the digestive juices going is to eat some bitters before. It's going to really help you process that fatty food. Do I recommend taking collagen peptides? That is different for every person. So I can't really make a blanket statement on that. It depends on what your health goals are, where you're coming from. In general, I think those things have benefits and can be super helpful depending, again, like it's a personal level. So I can't really say one way or another. I will say a great, one of my favorite forms of collagen and collagen peptides is bone broth, because of it's more of a whole food source versus an extracted source. So making your own bone broth and drinking that daily has a lot of really healthy collagen, as well as a bunch of other vitamins and minerals. And then what jobs, what degree, skills are you need to get the job? So I think Melissa, who asked about naturopathic medicine, you should try look into taking the class that I'll be teaching, because we're going to dive really deep. I'm gonna if you want to email me that question, I'm happy to answer. It's just not relevant to the topic today. But we're going to dive really deep into how to become a naturopathic doctor, the path it takes. I love it. So I wake up every morning super stoked to be doing what I'm doing and helping the people I help. So I've never, ever since I've started on this path, there hasn't been one day that I've regretted it. It's not for everybody, so I will say that too. I know a number of people who have dropped out or who have, gone a different path even after school. But for me personally, it's been awesome. Do I think diabetes can be cured through diet? I would say 85% yes. And it depends on what type of diabetes and at what stage of diabetes you're at. If you're very far gone, it can be a little bit difficult. Once you become insulin dependent, it can be pretty difficult to get back off of it. Definitely not impossible. And I would also say, though, not just diet, but exercise is really big in diabetes and being able to manage it naturally. So there's also a lot of botanical medicine that can be really supportive of that process as well. So I'd say diet plays a huge role. And you can cure diabetes naturally, definitely. Is the Mediterranean diet a good choice overall? I would say yes. I'd say, I don't like making blanket statements about diets. Like I said, I think there's not one diet that's good for everybody. But the one that has the most research to back it up, and I think is, after all of my experience and years of research, I would say a Mediterranean style diet tailored towards you specifically is one of the healthiest. Also, if you look at any research into blue zones, which are areas of the world that have the most people who have lived over 100, one of them is the Mediterranean. One of them is also in Japan, and so eating a more traditional Japanese diet. And one of them is also in Costa Mesa, California. So Seventh-day Adventists also who eat a vegan diet. So, but there's a lot of other factors into that wasn't just diet. But anyway, I do think the Mediterranean is a pretty good choice in general without going into the biochemical individuality. So magnesium supplements can make people sleepy and best to take them at night. Have I heard that? Do you think it's best to pair with other vitamins and minerals? So yeah, so I do recommend taking magnesium at night, unless somebody is like a very tense, high stress individual throughout the day. Maybe they need it throughout the day. But I do recommend most magnesium supplements to be taken at night just because it is very calming. And then other vitamins and minerals, it would just depend on your situation. So everyone I speak with is individual and what they need. So that's just going to be dependent on what the person in front of me is asking for and how they can be most supported and what their body needs. All right, last question. Two last questions. Well, yeah, I think we have time. Okay, what are your thoughts about food combining systems such as Ayurvedic or Chinese medicine, herbal cuisine? I think that's awesome. I think I'm most familiar with Ayurvedic medicine in terms of food combinations and constitutions and pairing and stuff like that. I adopt a lot of that into my own personal life. My partner also studied at the Ayurvedic Institute in Albuquerque and so we do that in our own life, and I do think there's a lot of value in it. I think there's a lot of value in any traditional teaching in terms of food. I mean, they're based on thousands and thousands of years of knowledge. You know, it's interesting, this whole thing with, you know, modern science and can we prove it or can we not prove it? And it's so interesting because I think so often they take a theory and then try to base a practice around it versus taking a practice that's based on experience and then creating the theory around it. And so I think traditional diets and traditional medicine has so much to offer us based on thousands of years of experience. So yes. And again, it's going to like different styles are going to resonate with different people. So play around. And then do you think supplements can be helpful, such as amino acids, branched chain amino acids, excuse me, protein powders, especially if somebody already has a healthy lifestyle? I think it depends on like the individual person's needs and desires and health goals. I think in general, supplementation, not necessarily with those things, because I think you can get enough amino acids and protein from your diet. But in terms of vitamins and minerals, because our soil is so depleted nowadays, sometimes supplementation is necessary, at least temporarily, to get people up to a healthy, repleted level. Also, too, if we're dealing with a situation where they have gut inflammation, we may need to provide supplementation while they're healing their gut so that they can actually get to a place where they're actually absorbing the minerals from their food. Because if you have gut inflammation, you might not be absorbing nutrients properly. So there is a time and a place. And again, it really depends on your health goals. I talk a lot with people in the exercise science world or bodybuilders, and they're like, you know, how much protein and what should I be doing? And I really think the question is, again, what are your goals? Your goals are to build body mass, because that doesn't necessarily equal health. If your goal is to get healthy, that may be different than just gaining muscle mass. So again, it's individual. And then I think this is the last question on here, so I'll throw it out. I think we have like a couple more minutes. Why are nightshades higher for food sensitivities such as tomatoes? I don't know the answer to that offhand. I know that I think an answer exists. I just don't know it. So if you wanted to write to me with that question, I will do some more research and get back to you. I just know that it is one of the things. It is, so nightshades are a Solanaceae family, which is like the same as belladonna. So if you think like belladonna is like super toxic and poisonous, so it could have to do with that. Like it has some of the chemical constituents in it are just a little bit more inflammatory to people because of their potential for toxicity. So yeah, that could be.
Well, Marisa.
All right, those are all the questions.
Marisa, again, I want to thank you so much for both the lecture and the answering of the questions and the richness of this, because what you really pointed out is the individual differences, and that makes your perspective and the naturopathic so different than much of allopathic medicine, where basically we do a large group and we assume everybody's the same, and then we come to an answer, you should take so many milligrams of vitamin C or something like that. Yet each of us, because of our genetics and environment, are different. That individual difference approach really optimizes health. And I truly want to thank you and invite everyone to take our holistic health classes. And I want to just make an announcement for the next lecture presentation as well, which I'll share for a moment. Because as summertime is coming, some of us want to travel. And so we have a great presenter in 2 weeks from now, Paige Verne, also a faculty member in the Department of Recreation, Parks and Tourism, who really is looking at wellness through adventure, transformative travel experience. And it's really remarkable when we do that. We take time off, we really get centered, we learn about other cultures. So I look forward to seeing all of you in 2 weeks or on May 7th. And finally, if you do have questions or you're intrigued in holistic health for next semester, want to take classes, take the holistic health minor, or like Marisa, earn the certificate in holistic health, enroll in our classes. And the contact information is listed here. You know, you can contact Rick Harvey, R. Harvey at SFSU, or you can look at our website, the Institute for Holistic Health Studies, www.sfsu.edu/IHHS, or at our whole Department of Recreation, Parks, and Tourism. And these lectures are presented by the Institute for Holistic Health and the Department of Recreation, Parks, Tourism, and Holistic Health from San Francisco State.